All right, good morning, Eastern Hills. How we doing? We good? Nice. Morning. I'm super pumped to teach today. I this morning was driving up and parked and saw that you have a fireworks stand in your front parking lot, and I was like, this is my kind of church. I think I'm gonna fit in here. My name is Ben Foote. I'd love to meet you after this. I teach here and there at Flatirons Community Church in Lafayette, Colorado. Some of you have no idea what that is. Others of you might be familiar because a couple years ago, the Flatirons Aurora campus used to be just down the hill in the Cherokee Trail School while we looked for a permanent location. So if you ever drove to church here at Eastern Hills early in the morning and you saw like people like just exhausted and sweating through their shirts and unloading trailers, that was Flatirons. You might have even seen me. I would be the one crawling in the grass, asking for a bottle of water and cursing the idea of campuses. A little bit about me before we get started. I'm 37, going on 38. I will take any advice that you've got on how to handle turning 40 without having a midlife crisis. I've pastored for 12 years. Like Lisa said, I live out in Dacono with my wife and my 3 kids. And also in October, we got a puppy, just to kind of, for Allie and I to prove to ourselves that like we can still make really poor decisions. But you'll get to know me a little more throughout this message. But again, I'll be in the lobby after this. I'd love to say hi to you. Don't be a stranger. Come say hi. I guess one thing I'd want you to hear right off the top of this thing is I have such a high respect for Eastern Hills. I love the way that you approach Jesus and the Bible and community, and I love the values of your church. Every time I've met an Eastern Hills staff member, they always embody those values. And I especially love your value of being real over religious. I love that one. That is a personal value of mine that I hold tightly to, mainly because I think it's a personal value that Jesus displayed. And unfortunately, we already know this. There's just lots of churches out there that tend to like just want to be religious and fake, and you don't have that here. So don't ever take for granted that you found like a church family who wants to be real with Jesus and one another. It's a special thing. Take care of this place. All right, but again, let's just get started. I'm so excited to be here. You're in the middle of this series called Voices, and so today I want to tell you 2 stories, all right? One is going to be from my personal life, and then the other story is from a life of a man in the Bible who oftentimes gets overlooked. His name is Naaman. Okay, Naaman is a voice that we rarely hear from and rarely learn from. I think mostly because the story is pretty short, kind of tucked into the Old Testament. It's just easy to kind of breeze right past the story of Naaman. But I want to tell you about him today. And today I want to tell these 2 stories because I want to try to answer a question together. And the question is, what does it look like to take a step of faith? All right, if you're a Christian, then you know, like, you've heard that, or maybe you've even said it, right? Like, and we know it's something we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be taking steps of faith. But again, if we're being honest, if you're being real over religious, half the time, we don't know what we're talking about when we say taking a step of faith. We have no idea what that means. We don't know what it looks like, and we don't know where to start. It feels too abstract. How do I take a step of faith? Am I supposed to just like read my Bible more or pray more? Or am I supposed to do what the church I grew up in told me to do? Am I supposed to like wear WWJD bracelets and burn all my Led Zeppelin albums and, like watch only Kirk Cameron movies? So like, how do I take a step of faith? That's the question I want to answer together today. And the best way I know to do that is share these 2 stories, one from the life of Naaman and one from my own personal life. So let's get started. All right, we're going to look at Naaman first. If you want to follow along in your Bible or follow along on the Bible app on your phone or whatever, we're going to be in 2 Kings chapter 5. All right, if the Bible is still a new and strange book to you, that's okay. That's actually wonderful. I'll tell you my trick for finding 2 Kings. You just open the Bible randomly to anywhere and hope to get lucky. Then if you don't, you just go to the table of contents and you find 2 Kings. That's my trick. All right, so Naaman's story starts in 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 1, and it starts like this. Now, Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram, and he was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. All right, that's our first verse, and in our first verse, we get some context for our story. Our context is that Naaman is the supreme commander of a nation called Aram, and he's also a top dog. We learned that too. He's stacked a bunch of W's for the nation of Aram, and so Naaman is highly respected and esteemed and accomplished, and he would have been world famous at this point. People love him, people fear him, people listen to him. But at the same time, we learn that he's suffering from leprosy. Okay, leprosy is a nasty disease. It slowly rots away all of your flesh, and there was no cure for it during Naaman's time, and it was highly contagious. And so during Naaman's time, if you caught leprosy, you were publicly ostracized until the day that it inevitably killed you, because no one else wants to catch it. And so the context that we get in the first verse is that Naaman is a highly respected man who is suddenly very desperate. Okay? Next verse. Now bands from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. And one day she said to her mistress, she goes, if only my master, if only Naaman would go see the prophet who was in Samaria, that was in Israel. He goes, this prophet from Israel, he would cure Naaman of his leprosy if Naaman would just go see him. Another quick time out for a quick geography and history lesson. I love all this nerdy stuff, but I promise it's just important, and I won't stay long here. But a quick geography lesson. Israel, which is the nation of the Israelites, God's people, this is where they live and they worship. On the western border of Israel is the Mediterranean Sea, and then on the eastern border of Israel is the nation of Aram. All right, this is where Naaman is commander. It's in modern-day Syria. Okay, if you look and read a different part of the Bible, you learn that in the recent past, right before the moment that we're talking about now, Aram invaded Israel. They go to war with Israel. Israel fought back. They whooped up. They pushed the Arameans out of Israel. And then the king of Aram humiliatingly begs Israel for a peace treaty, and Israel greenlights it. The point I'm getting at is that Israel is one of the few nuts that Naaman, as a commander, just can't crack. Okay, Israel is just going to be a constant reminder, humiliating reminder of one of Aram's very few defeats. Now, ever since that defeat, there's been this peace treaty, but there are still border skirmishes between Israel and Aram because the two nations are mortal enemies. And in one of those skirmishes, as disgusting as it is, Naaman is rewarded one of the ancient spoils of war, a brand new Israelite slave to serve his wife. But then this slave, this new servant, makes this absolutely insane suggestion to Naaman. She says that Naaman should go visit the prophet of Israel and ask to be healed of leprosy. And the reason that I've given you all of this historical and geographical context is to drive home this point. That suggestion would be absolutely humiliating to a man like Naaman. Okay, because the suggestion is for Naaman to walk into Israel, the one nation that he wasn't strong enough to conquer, and then beg for Israel's prophet to heal him of one of the diseases that everyone at the time knew was totally incurable. The suggestion is that Naaman walks into Israel, a literal loser, and then asks their prophet to heal him of something, to do something that is literally impossible. It's embarrassing. This would be humiliating for Naaman. At the same time, though, remember, Naaman is desperate, right? So he figures well, what else am I gonna do? What else do I have to lose? And so he packs up his bags and he takes off for Israel, and he reaches the door of the prophet. And this happens. Skipping down to verse 9. So Naaman went with his horses and chariots, and he stopped at the door of Elisha's house. But Elisha sent a messenger to go talk to Naaman. And the messenger says, hey, go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed. Okay, so Elisha is the prophet of Israel that Naaman has been looking for. But Elisha is a wild card. All right, this dude is unpredictable. He's a wild man if you go read other stories about Elisha. For example, a few chapters before this one, there's this story where Elisha's out on a stroll. He's out walking around. This group of guys come up. They make fun of him for being bald. He calls down a curse on them, and the second he does that, a bear runs out of the woods and wrecks these guys. He's wild. All right, the lead pastor at Flatirons that I've worked with for over a decade, he's bald, and I'll tease him about being bald, but never in the woods. because you just never know. Elisha is a wild card. All right, so picture this situation from Naaman's point of view. Okay, Naaman travels to Israel in style. He's got horses and chariots and the whole 9 yards, trying to show everyone how important he is, how famous he is. But then when he pulls up to Elisha's house, Elisha won't even step outside for a handshake. Instead, he sends a messenger to go and talk to Naaman. And then to make matters worse, the messenger tells Nathan, he goes, hey, the magic trick, the key to being healed is, drum roll, to go and take a bath. It's humiliating. I mean, it sounds like a prank. Okay, Naaman's pride is wounded, and his reputation feels smeared, and his ego is disintegrating, and so he gets furious. Okay, to sum up the next few verses, which we won't read together right now, but basically he storms off, he's ranting and he's raving to his servants, and basically what he says is he goes, I thought at the very least Elisha would come outside of his house to meet me like I'm famous. And he goes, on top of that, I thought he'd do something incredible. I'm an important man. I figured he'd wave a magic wand or perform a miracle or something like that. Instead, he tells me to take a bath. Like, I've taken baths before. Does this guy think I'm stupid? Is this guy joking? He basically is like, this Elisha guy is a manipulative wild card who's trying to embarrass me. I'm out of here. And he storms off. Luckily, Naaman's servants try talking some sense into him. Look at this, verse 13. Naaman's servants went to him, and they said, my father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? You'd have done it. How much more then when he tells you, wash and be cleansed? Basically what's going on is these servants know that Naaman is dealing with wounded pride, and so they call him out on it. And they basically go, Naaman, dude, get off your high horse. All right, if this prophet asked you to do something that would make you look great, you'd do it in a heartbeat, right? If he told you, hey, the key to being cured is to go conquer more territory, you would have gone and done it. If he told you to pay him a lot of money, you're rich, you would have done it. Those things make you look great. But then just because he told you to go wash in a dirty river, you're suddenly above that. Makes no sense. They call him out. This is important for today, so catch this. They basically tell Naaman, you are passing up your only opportunity to be healed just because you're too proud to humble yourself. These guys are brave to say something like that to Naaman. And what's crazy is that Naaman listens to his servant's wisdom and he figures, what the heck, I'll go try it. And so again, picture this. Like Naaman is in the nation that he was too weak to conquer, taking advice from a prophet who was too busy to come and see him, and now he's walking into the dirtiest river in town to take a bath like a common beggar. And then this happens. So he went down, and he dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Listen, the minute that Naaman quit worrying what other people think and quit worrying about like his own social status and his respect and his ego, like the minute that Naaman chose to swallow his pride and humble himself, he was healed. Not only was his body healed, but his soul began healing. If you go read the rest of the story, which you should do later today, you learn that Naaman ends up putting his faith in the God of Israel, and then he goes back home, and Naaman becomes a follower of God in the foreign nation of Aram. That's how the story ends, the end. Now, what does this ancient history lesson have to teach us today living in 2023? Well, here's the thing that I think we should catch. Okay, all of this transformation, all of this healing in Naaman's life began in a very specific way. It began when Naaman became so desperate for healing that he finally chose to swallow his pride and humble himself. And that's where just every step of faith begins. Whether it's your first step of faith and you're just now starting to trust in Jesus, or maybe you followed Jesus for years and years, but the relationship feels stale and you're ready for something more and new and better and different. Like every step of faith begins in the same place, which is humility, because healing always begins with humility. And so if you want to take a step of faith today, then you need to start asking yourself a question now while I move on to tell my second story. The question you have to ask yourself is, am I passing up an opportunity to be healed just because I'm too proud to humble myself? Start asking that question now. All right, that was Naaman's story, but his story hits close to home for me personally because over the last about year, God has been teaching me a very similar lesson. And so I want to tell you a story from my life now, okay? You don't know me, so I gotta give you some context for who I am. So for years and years, for the first 2.5 decades of my life, I fought actively and adamantly against God, everything in my power. I grew up in church, and by the time I could start to kind of think for myself, I just decided I don't believe in any of this stuff. All right, I was just where some of you used to be and where maybe some of you are now. It's I thought I was too smart and I'm too postmodern and I'm too refined for what I believed to be at the time the intellectual crutch of needing a God. Right? In my mind, it's Jesus and God, they're fairy tales that humanity created because we're too weak to cope with the fact that we're all gonna die one day. Obviously, whenever I talked about faith with people, I was a real peach to be around. But at the same time, I was intellectually pure about the thing. And what I mean by that is I didn't just throw it out. Instead, I decided to do my homework. I started to dig into the Bible so that I could prove for myself that Jesus is a hoax. And I wanted to prove to my poor family who got fooled by the fairy tale of Jesus that Jesus wasn't something to put your faith in. I did what I called at the time research for years, for 10 years intensely, to prove that Jesus was a hoax. But then what ended up happening after years of this was that God broke me. And I will never stop thanking God for totally breaking me. He eventually just humbled me to the point where I couldn't deny him anymore. And so 14-ish years ago, I'm sitting in this little coffee shop in Lafayette, Colorado. I start praying, I'm crying. There were other people there. I'm sure it was embarrassing, but I start praying to Jesus for the very first time in a very long time. And I just tell him, I'm Jesus, I have all these questions about you. Some of them I don't think I'll ever get answered this side of death. But at the same time, even though I don't totally understand you, I, for some reason, totally believe you and totally trust you. And if you could just please start fixing me. I'll go wherever you want me to go. I'll do whatever you want me to do. You can do anything you want to with my life if you could just please resurrect me too. And ever since that moment, for the last 14 years, my life has been a whirlwind of deeply rooted spiritual healing. Okay, I want you to hear me. Has my life been perfect? No, not at all. And if you got to know me, you'd be no, dude, you're not even remotely close to perfect. It's not been perfect. The last 14 years of my journey with Jesus has also included addiction and deception and hiding and self-hatred and self-harm and depression. But at the same time, looking in the rearview mirror, I would never characterize the last 14 years of my life as one of addiction and self-hatred and depression. I would characterize my story as one of healing. Healing has been the primary theme of my journey with Jesus for the last 14 years. Okay, that's background. But because God still loves me, he also decides to continue to humble me and continue teaching me new things. And during a 2-month sabbatical that I took a year ago, he began revealing a new thing that he wanted to heal in my heart. And it happened all during this solitude retreat that I took. And I want to share that moment with you. Okay, so it was about a year ago, and I head up to a cabin in the woods for 3 days and 2 nights with no one else. It's just me and Jesus, and honestly, I'm not very good at these things. And so I get up there, and the solitude retreat goes just about like every other solitude retreat I've ever taken, which means I sit there in silence, and I feel nothing except for strangely, ravenously hungry. That's basically all I feel, and I'm just not good at these things. And so my solitude retreat just becomes kind of wondering what in the world God is doing with my life while quietly eating boxes and boxes of hot and spicy Cheez-Its all by myself. And so day 1, I feel I'm not hearing or learning anything. Day 2, nothing. Day 3 is a half day. I wake up. I'm tired of sitting around bored in silence and praying. And so I decide I'm going to read a book. All right, and I brought this tiny little book called With Open Hands. You should buy this book, called With Open Hands by one of my favorite Christian authors, Henry Naaman. And I'd never read it before, so I crack it open, and I start reading through the introduction, and Naaman explains the title of his book, With Open Hands. And he explains that there are areas of our lives where we have what he calls clenched fists. These things that we want to keep total control of these areas of our lives. We're too scared to let them go. We're holding on tightly to them. And he says that everyone has this. Okay, this might be our careers or our bank accounts or our sexuality or the respect that we feel like we've earned and we deserve, or our anger or our hatred, or the secrets that we feel like we need to keep secret so that we can manage our identity. You name it. There are just areas of our lives that we do not want to let go of. Okay, and basically what we're telling God is we're like, hey, God, you can have any part of my life except for this. Don't touch this. I don't trust you with it. And then Naaman explains that you can't truly begin praying until you unclench your fists and open your hands. And tell God, like, I'm scared and I don't know what you're gonna do with it, but like, yes, you can even have this part of my life, like this part that I've been keeping from you. And honestly, at this cabin, I'm reading through this, and I'm just kind of going like, oh yeah, that's a really good thought. I should file that away. I could maybe teach on that one day, which is funny because that's what I'm doing right now. But in the moment, I would kind of just was reading it from a cold and distant place. I'm just a pastor looking for things I could teach on in the future. But then the introduction ends with a written prayer that you can pray to God. And I decide, what the heck, I'll do that. And so there I am, alone in the woods, and the first time I've spoken out loud in 3 days, it's this prayer, which goes like this. Dear God, I am so afraid to open my clenched fists. Who will I be when I have nothing left to hold on to? And who will I be when I stand before you with empty hands? Like, please help me to gradually open my hands and to discover that I am not what I own, but instead what you want to give me. And what you want to give me is love, unconditional, everlasting love. Amen. And I pray that out loud. And God absolutely breaks me again. I'm like weeping as I pray this out loud. It just like totally caught me off guard. And I didn't hear an audible voice. A lot of you have had this experience. You know what I'm talking about. It's more just like this foreign thought entered into my head, a thought that I'm not wise or discerning enough to have on my own. God was teaching me something. And what he taught me at the cabin was that ever since I was a little kid, I've always wanted to do something important. I can remember thinking that as early as about 6 or 7 years old. I want to do something important. I'm a musician, and so for a little bit, it was like, I'm gonna make really important music. And then I went off to college, and I studied English, and I became a writer, and I was like, I'm gonna write really important stuff. And then God totally changed my life around, and I became a pastor, and it was like, I'm not gonna do just any kind of ministry. I wanna do important ministry. I wanna chase after the people Jesus chased after, the lost and the broken and the hurting and the people who don't think that Jesus is possible for them. I wanna do something important. And at the core of that passion, like at the very core of it, I believe it's honorable. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to do something of lasting value with your life. But at the cabin that day, what God revealed to me was that like somewhere over the course of all those years, I had taken the idea of doing something different and I had like manipulated it and distorted it into being viewed as someone important. And the truth is that doing something important and being viewed as someone important are in direct opposition to one another in the kingdom of my God. And as I prayed that prayer, God like let this truth come into full focus. It felt like I had been staring in like a foggy, like steamed up mirror for years, and then God wiped it clean, and I can finally see who I really am, and I don't really like what I'm seeing, and it hurt, and it wounded my pride. Because honest to God, I don't know who I am if I'm not the person who's always trying to be important. That's been over 30 years of my life. It hurt. Even though it hurt, at the same time, it felt so like loving of God to reveal it to me. He didn't seem mad. He didn't seem disappointed. It really felt like he was going, hey, Ben, I really love you, and so I've got to tell you some hard truth because you cannot keep living this way. What it felt like was he was telling me, hey, Ben, like this is your leprosy. This is what you're carrying around, and it's going to ruin you. This constant drive and perfectionism and the need to prove yourself and the desire to be viewed as someone important. He's like, Ben, it's going to like eat away at your soul until it ruins you. And then at the cabin, it's like Jesus' words start ringing in my head back when he said, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. You want to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps? You want to keep all the things secret to manage your identity? You want to go find your own pride and identity and value in something? You're going to lose it. And then on the other hand, whoever loses his life for me will find it. If you just let go of the things you're trying to take control of, you'll find true life. And God was revealing to me that even though I've always considered myself humble, most often I'm honestly just insecure. And those two things can look really similar, but they're worlds apart, because humility is fearing God, respecting God. It's like you only care what God thinks, and so you only seek to please him. Insecurity, on the other hand, is fearing people, respecting people. You're only thinking about what other people are thinking about you. And God taught me that even though I think I can honestly say that I never did this intentionally, but what God taught me is that what happened is I ended up finding a lot of my worth and value, maybe even all of it, in being on staff at Flatirons Community Church. Because the truth is, again, just being real over religious right now, the truth, which a lot of pastors won't admit, is that being a pastor at a big church is a really quick fix for an insecure person who wants to feel important all the time. And part of me is embarrassed to admit that to you. But then honestly, most of me is relieved anytime I get to confess that to other people who follow Jesus. Because I had started down a path that I know, and you know, it ends in destruction. We've seen it ruin so many pastors' lives all throughout the world. I was looking for ministry to define who I am, and that would have eaten away at me until it ruined my life. Who knows what could have happened with my life? The cool thing is that rather than humiliate me, God chose to humble me, because I promise he's really, really good. And so I drove down that mountain a year ago away from my solitude retreat, and I just felt totally washed clean. And I drove away from that mountain praying again. I'm like, God, again, you can do whatever you want with my life. If you just please continue revealing these diseases that I have in my heart, and please continue healing me from them. And ever since that moment, my life has been turned totally upside down in this really crazy and honestly really terrifying, but also really wonderful way. In fact, that moment at the Solitude Retreat was like a first domino that knocked over a series of dominoes that eventually led me to teaching here today, because I eventually decided that I needed to quit my job over at Flatirons. It was way too closely tied to my identity. I still teach there about once a month. I feel like teaching is the thing that God was clear of, you have to do it. You'll be disobedient if you don't teach. So I still teach there once a month. I'm just not on staff anymore. I don't lead ministries there anymore. I don't office with my friends anymore. I don't sit in on the big meetings and have a voice of influence anymore. It was like one of those movies where the cop gets demoted, right? Turn in your weapon, badge, and keys or whatever. That's what I did with Flatirons. And hilariously, still to this day, if I teach there, I'm locked out in the morning. I can't get in. I have to wave in the window until a volunteer sees me. For me, I could just tell that for a season, at least, I needed to go cold turkey from the thing that I had tied all of my identity to, which for me was being on staff at a big church. And it felt like God was saying, hey, I gave you teaching, you got to keep doing that, but for the next season, stop trying to be someone important and stop trying to earn my love by working for me, and instead just find a way to rest in simply being one of my sons. And it's been a trip. I quit my job in April. My family has been living in this really gray area, somewhere between self and unemployed. My wife, Allie, she's wonderful. She started working again to help contribute to our family. I've been doing things here and there to make money. We honestly don't know how we're going to pay the bills by the end of the year. But at the same time, we wouldn't change a thing. Because I'm only 2.5 months into this new adventure, and I can feel that God is slowly but surely healing this disease that crept into my heart. And I just had to humble myself. For me, I had to remove the things that I used to take all my pride in, like a stable paycheck that paid the bills and a position of leadership and influence and a long tenured role at a big church. Like, I had to remove those things and humble myself so that I could begin learning the lesson that from this day forward, if the only important things I ever do are to love Allison and love my 3 kids and passionately chase after Jesus, it's enough. That's enough. It's enough for Jesus to continue deeply loving me, and it's enough for him to continue healing the broken parts of my life. For the last year, I have been learning hands-on the same lesson that Naaman himself learned. I have been learning that healing always begins with humility. Naaman had to let go of his fame and his respect and his ego in order to humble himself and be healed. And I had to let go of looking for all of my worth and my value in ministry and in my job in order to humble myself and begin being healed. You remember we started this thing by asking a question. What does it look like to take a step of faith? And the answer is that healing always begins with humility. There's not a way around that. And so if you want to take a step of faith today, then you have to answer this question honestly. No religious answers. Answer it honestly and be real about it. You have to answer the question of Naaman's servants. Am I passing up an opportunity to be healed just because I'm too proud to humble myself? Because here's the truth. It's a hard truth. My prayer is that you don't ever have to learn this truth the hard way. But here's the truth. God wants you to grow in faith. He wants you to grow intimately in relationship with him. And so God's plan A is he commands you to humble yourself. Right? That's not hard truth. That's fantastic truth. That truth leads to freedom. That's not the hard truth. The hard truth is that God also has a plan B. He does, and it means if you continue to fight against him and continue to try to heal and fix yourself on your own power so that you can get the credit for it, or so that your skeletons can stay in the closet and never have to see the light of day so that you can manage your identity, if you refuse to humble yourself, God moves to plan B. And plan B is he will allow you to just humiliate yourself. I've seen it in my life. We've seen it in the lives of others. If you continue to just live and hold on to your own pride and ego, eventually, after giving you 1,000 opportunities to just humble yourself before him, eventually God will just stop protecting you from the inevitable consequences of the way that you're living your life. Because maybe that will get your attention. That's Romans 1. Go read it later. He'll give you over to your own desires and your own ways, and you will crash and burn, and it will be humiliating. Now, I don't know what part of your life that you're like holding tightly onto and refusing to let go of. I'm not your Holy Spirit. But my guess is that for some of us, God is speaking up right now, and he's clearly pointing to a part of your life, and he's saying, let that go. Give it to me. Humble yourself and give me that part of your life before it drags you to your destruction and your humiliation. Again, I don't know what that is for you. I'm not your Holy Spirit. I'm just here to encourage you to take that step of faith. Choose humility before you wind up humiliated. They're 2 totally different things, and only one of them leads to life. Here are some kind of common examples of what this looks like, the stuff I've seen in my own life and also seen throughout just pastoring for years and years. Here's what it looks like. Choosing humility is seeking out a marriage counselor. And choosing humiliation is seeking out a divorce lawyer. Please don't freak out when I say that or you see that on screen. Let me explain. I know that in certain situations, especially ones where you were in danger, your divorce was freedom, right? It wasn't humiliation. I'm not talking about those unique situations right now. Instead, I'm referring to the countless conversations I've had with couples who were humiliated about their divorce because they knew they could have fixed their marriage if they put the work in years ago. And they're just able to see now, in retrospect, that they couldn't do it because of pride. Because it takes humility. It takes humility to admit that things just aren't as good as they could be in your marriage, and humility to admit that you can't fix the relationship on your own. And it takes humility to say, you know what, instead of just trying to win every single argument, I actually want to find common ground between me and my wife, and I don't know how to do that, and I need help with that. It takes humility. And if you can't humble yourself, and just admit that you aren't necessarily Mr. Wonderful yourself, then it's a matter of time. Like the clock is ticking down to humiliation. Another example, and I have lived this one. Humility is confession, and humiliation is getting caught. James says, confess your sins to one another and pray with one another so that you may be not saved, that you may be healed. And it takes humility to come clean on something that you're addicted to. It takes humility to take the skeletons out of the closet and drag them into the open light in front of people that love you and care about you. It takes a ton of humility, like the porn addiction that you've kept secret, or the resentment that you've been harboring in your heart, or the money that you've kept hidden from your spouse, or the baggage from your past that you have told no one. Like, you could choose to bring that into the light today. You could. There's nothing stopping you. You could bring these hidden parts of yourself out into the open so that you can finally live in freedom from them instead of living like chained to them, in bondage to them. You could do that today. Or you could just keep doing what you're doing. Keep trying. Keep it all secret. Don't let anybody know. Try to keep them in their closet even though they're trying to get out. I'm just telling you from personal experience as someone who loves you and doesn't even know you yet. It is a matter of time. The clock is ticking down to humiliation. You're gonna get caught. Listen, if you feel like you haven't taken a step of faith in a while, or you feel like you're so close to just going all the way into the deep end with Jesus, but you just feel stuck, I'm telling you, the culprit is pride. And so ask yourself, am I passing up an opportunity to be healed just because I'm too proud to humble myself? And I know, because I have sat in seats like this and I have learned this hard truth myself. I know that some of us are so close right now. You already know what you need to do. You already know. You're just trying to psych up the courage to actually go and do it because you're terrified. You know what you need to confess to your spouse or confess to your best friends. You know the secrets that you've kept. You know what you got to stop doing. You know what you got to start doing. You're just afraid you're going to lose everything or people will leave you. You're afraid of letting people down. I get it. I have been there. I'm asking, like Naaman, how desperate are you? Are you desperate for healing? Are you desperate enough to try something crazy, something humble? For a lot of us, you already know what you need to do. I'm just here to encourage you. Please just do it. I'm basically begging you to choose humility before you wind up humiliated. God will always honor your humility. He will not let it go to waste. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. I never said it would be easy. There might be fallout from you finally being honest with the people around you, but you can't control the fallout of doing the right thing. You can only control choosing to do the right thing. And then you can place all of your confidence and assurance in the fact that Jesus will walk through that fallout with you. He will not let go of you. He will not forsake or abandon you. And so humble yourself before you wind up humiliated. For those of us who are so close to doing what we need to do, I want to close our time together by praying this beautiful prayer from Henry Naaman over us together right now. So I'm going to ask that you stand and close your eyes. God, we are so afraid to open our clenched fists. Who will we be when we have nothing left to hold on to? And who will we be when we let all the secrets out into the light? And who will we be when we don't know what to hold on to find our own value and our own identity? Who are we going to be when we come to you with empty hands? God, please help us to gradually open our hands and discover that we aren't what we own. And we are not the secrets that we've kept, and we are not the things that we hold on to and take pride in, and we are just more than the sum of all of our sin and our baggage and our trauma. Instead, we are what you want to give us, and what you want to give us is love, unconditional, everlasting, healing love. God, I can't pray it any more beautifully than that. God, give us the courage to choose humility and to do the right thing. God, as some of us today begin to let go of the things we've been holding on to. We ask that you hold on to us tightly in the middle of that. God, may we do it not in the name of legalism and not in the name of following rules, but in the name of freedom, because it is for freedom that you set us free. God, give us courage to choose humility before we're humiliated. God, thank you for this truth, even though it's a tough truth. I love you very much, and I pray this in the name of the one who set us free, Jesus Christ. Amen.